Second. Howdy there, and welcome to Overlooked Critical Matters with Nancy for Thinking. Today, our guest speaker is going to be Greg Thompson. Greg, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and give people who you are and what your background is?
Sure, Nancy. Hi, my name's Greg Thompson. I'm a captain with Dallas. I've been in the fire service for a little over 27 years now. I've been with Dallas for 23 of those years. And of the 23 years, I've been a frontline officer for 15. I've been an instructor. I teach our fire academy, and I guess for about 2 years, and I teach a lot of our continuing educations in the department as well.
Okay. And our first encounter with each other was at a community center where you and I both spoke, and I really enjoyed your take and your view from your experience, and that's why I was thankful that you agreed to come on today. So, speaking of that, what were your thoughts when you first learned of the build near our home? What were your thoughts when you learned of it?
Well, when I learned about it, I was actually kind of shocked. The little bit of information that I do know about lithium batteries, and knowing that they were going to put that many at one location, and being out here in the country with essentially no water, no infrastructure, I was highly concerned because as a firefighter, I immediately always think about what happens when things go bad. And out here in the country, we don't have fire hydrants. We don't have water per se enough to handle an emergency of that magnitude if one of these were to catch fire. So I was pretty concerned about it. And volunteer departments, those guys and gals do a great job at what they do. But they're very limited on staffing. And if you have something like this catch, it's going to take a lot more than what we have our infrastructure out here set up.
Well, not only that, would a volunteer fire department have the necessary gear for that type of chemical runaway?
No, they wouldn't have air monitoring equipment. They wouldn't have. If one of these were to catch fire, it's a two-sided problem. You would have the fire to contend with, but you also have the gases that will off-gas during the fire. So you'll have a hazmat situation with it, a hazardous material situation go along with it. So it's a two-part problem. You have the fire and then the hazardous material side with it. And these volunteer departments typically do not have any training in hazardous materials. They don't have air monitoring equipment or just the gear. But you jump to the fire side of it, they wouldn't have the water to confine or contain that size of a fire as well either. So they'll be behind the 8 ball no matter what.
Right, and then their gear would not be sufficient for keeping the nanoparticles or the micron particles out from within. Not any fire department, as my understanding, would have the proper gear for that.
No, so right. So when you start talking the hazmat end of it, the typical firefighter's bunker gear that everybody thinks of is what we fight fire in. That you have to kind of look at as thermal protection. It breathes, so it does not work really against a lot of the microparticles, nanoparticles you're talking about. It breathes right through. What it's designed to do is provide thermal protection. So if your house catches on fire, it will help prevent us from burning ourselves going inside with something that's hot. But when you flop over to the hazmat end of it, that is a total different aspect of it. A lot of those suits you will see kind of like people in laboratories wearing those plastic covers, totally separate. And no, most fire departments do not keep that. They're not trained in it. It takes a certified hazardous materials team to do that. And The closest one around here would probably be Dallas, and you're probably looking at about an hour and a half response out here, and that's if they're not busy doing something else.
Yeah, I would say at least 90 minutes, and especially with all of the constructions on all of the highways this way between 2080, even 175, you're looking at whole traffic no matter which way you go. Like, I think at this point, taking Highway 20 or 80, it's just understood you're going to be stuck in traffic at some point.
Right. And you know, obviously they have lights and sirens. They can kind of cut through that, but you know, they're stationed more or less in downtown Dallas, and coming out of downtown Dallas, depending on the time of day, rush hour, you know, that would add time to it as well. But there's just nothing out here immediate, especially when you look at if one of these was to catch, you're looking at having to wait. So your initial first responders would be the volunteers. Well, I believe the Witten Fire Chief said that their average response is 3 to 4 volunteers on an average call. So if one of these were to go up, your initial response of 3 to 4 volunteers trying to evacuate 1 mile square radius, they have a very daunting task, not to mention what's burning in front of them. It's going to be almost an impossible situation to deal with. And not only that, the longevity of that, if one of these BESS or battery energy storage systems were to burn, history shows that these things burn for days. They do not go out within the first 30 minutes. There was a few last year that caught fire in California. I know one burned for 2 days, another one burned for 5 days. And when you're talking about that, if you have 3 to 4 people, where is their relief coming from? They're not going to be able to sit out there and work 3 or 4 people for 2 to 5 days straight. So where's the relief? They're just not set up in the country to handle these type of storage facilities. If these things are going to be used, they need to be set up in more of an industrial setting that's prepared, that has a hazardous materials team nearby, that has basically all of the infrastructure, the paid fire department, and a number of first responders that can show up to help and continue to relieve each other, you know, for 2 to 5 days at a time. That just doesn't work out here. There's no infrastructure for them.
Right. And so you had mentioned you just did a 1 mile evacuation. Where did that number come from? How does the fire department determine the evacuation zone?
So when we first started looking up this BESS and the lithium batteries, I got the number out of what we call an ERG, which is it's a guidebook that every fire engine keeps. It's yellow. It's put out by National Transportation Authority. And what it is, I do not have one here to show. I don't have it with me, but it lists every single chemical. So if we roll up on, like, say, a 18-wheeler that's laid on its side, and everybody driving down the road, you've probably seen them little placards on the side of 18-wheelers, different colors. They got different symbols, different numbers. Well, those are for us. So if something like that was to happen, get in an accident, we can look at that placard, look at those numbers, and I can get this guidebook, open the book up as a quick reference, so I know exactly what is being transported, to know what type of chemical or what type of dangers is presented in front of me. And in that, it will give me recommendations as far as evacuation. Do I need to evacuate a half mile? How far do I need to keep traffic back as for the public safety? So that's all in this ERG book. I did a quick reference on a BESS system, and everything in it based off of a fire of one of these lithium battery BESS units state of the materials that off gas. Let's see, I've got a list of them here. Gas is hydrogen fluoride, and hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and organic solvent vapors. So when you look all of that up, everything says start evacuation 1 mile in all directions. And now when a hazmat team gets there and they have air monitoring equipment, they can maybe shrink that back down to a half a mile or a mile and a half. That's a rough guide. So right off the beginning, it's going to be 1 mile until we get experts on scene that can actually monitor the air quality. Wind would play a big part of it. If you have 15, 20 mile an hour wind, you might have to evacuate a mile and a half to the south, but only a half a mile to the north. But initially, you would start a mile in all directions.
Right. And then heaven forbid it be on a day like today when it's raining, because then it's just going to exasperate it further, right?
Well, humidity does play a big part of a lot of different gases. We're kind of getting into science a little bit. Some gases are heavier than air, some are lighter than air. The ones that are lighter than air on a humid day like that, it will keep things lower to the ground, right? And also keep in mind, in the country, when I'm talking a mile of evacuation, I'm just talking people. I haven't even begun to talk about livestock. I haven't talked about the cattle. I haven't talked about the poultry. I haven't talked about any of that, let alone what happens to the fish in the streams or the ponds or anything like that. So, this is going to have a big effect on a lot of things. That's why my personal professional opinion is these things belong in an industrial setting. They don't belong out in the middle of, essentially a cow pasture in East Texas. They do not belong there.
Right. Not next to major water sources. There's at least two there. You got the watershed for Tarrant County, and then you also have the aquifer, which is another major water source. You have at least
right. It is a water source as far as pollutant go, but it's not a water source really that could be used for the fire service to tap into to use for extinguishment, because a lot of those creeks are dry a lot of times of the year. It's not a steady source, but for the pollutant wise, yes, you're right.
Yeah, and actually, I believe our fire marshal actually in the NFP 855 code, he's requiring them to provide their own water source for that reason, because we don't have sustainable water. So if you want to build here, you are now required to provide your own source of ongoing mitigation for any fire or hazards, which is significant because it's basically impossible to do, right?
Well, yes, in this area, I live about 2.5 miles from this one particular site where they're wanting to put this BESS system. And I've been out here about 18 years, and I have been told by many people there's no groundwater, there is no well water in this area. So as far as I know, yeah, they don't have a way to provide water for that, let alone the gallonage that it needs, because you're not talking about a small holding tank of water. You're talking about a large supply of water that just doesn't exist out here.
I had actually spoken on a previous episode. I had a guest that was Heather from, she's from Fruitdale near Monterey Bay, which is by Moss Landing. She was advising me that two things of what you just stated. The first is they had an emergency plan in place, but the emergency plan was only if one battery should catch fire, but they had 80,000 catch fire. And I think the starting evacuation, what they ended up evacuating was like an 8-mile radius.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And when you start talking an 8-mile radius, think of the number of people or first responders it would take to just evacuate alone, let alone start working to try to mitigate this problem of 80,000 batteries burning. I mean, that is a lot of people that, they're not out here.
They shut down a highway, a school, and I think there was one instance, if I remember correctly, where this mom had taken her kid to school or something like that and was coming back where her other kid was at home, and they wouldn't let her enter. And she's like, no, my kid is at home. I am going in. And so it had to fight against them during the evacuation thing because her kid was at home. Which, as a parent, you're not going to abandon your kid in a toxic environment. You're not.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And, then there's also the aftermath, because you're talking about the gases. But one of the things that I found interesting is they were trying to state that the heavy metals burn off during the off-gassing, during the runaways. It's burned off at the temperatures. But this, again, goes into science. Let's go into science. You cannot bind a heavy metal or a metal with a gas. It does not bind. It's not capable of burning itself off. Would you agree?
Yeah. To my knowledge, I believe you're right. To my knowledge,
Which is why they found so many high levels of lead, manganese, nickel, and cobalt in their soil and in their protected
Yes.
areas. Because it's
Yes, the ones that have burned in the past, I have read reports to where there is a lot of that is found, and that is common in these lithium batteries. Whether the lithium battery be in a BESS system like what we have trying to go in here, or even an EV, an electric car, all of these lithium batteries are essentially have these heavy metals in them, and that's pretty much what makes them pretty dangerous on several ends. One, they don't go out with water. You know, as a fire service, we're still trying to play catch up and figure out just the electric vehicles. There's been documented cases of these electric vehicles catching on fire in Florida and burning for 4 hours in the middle of the highway, having to shut a highway down and just let this car burn until it burns itself out, because you can't, it doesn't go out with water.
right.
So we pretty much just rope it off, put water on it to try to keep it cool, but more or less let it burn itself out. And the last numbers that I saw, just one electric car. Now keep in mind, this is an electric car, a lot less batteries than what a BESS system is. They're saying around 4,000 gallons of water. Just for an electric vehicle.
Right, which is what, maybe a 20th to a 50th of the size of the one BESS system.
Right. Not, yeah, just a very small number compared to what's in a BESS system. Right.
Yeah, that's the problem, especially when you're in a county that doesn't have water.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. No infrastructure, and that's kind of the key word, is the infrastructure. You know, I'm not going to try to get into politics, but a lot of these companies kind of want to come out to the county like this because they think they can get in, they can buy stuff cheap, and they can more or less cut corners, you know, and save on their bottom line. And because there is no infrastructure out here, no rules, no regulations, and they can kind of feel like they can do as they will. And it puts communities like this, you know, in jeopardy.
You know, we were recently discussing with the owner of the company, Tulare, and one of the things that I thought was interesting is he stated that their company handles solar, wind, and BESS. But when we asked him how many he has operational, he only has one operational, and it's wind. When we asked him how many projects he had 15. And he even admitted that he was already looking to sell this project. So basically, they're coming in, they're building these large-scale toxic situations that have no infrastructure, like you stated, for fire, for water, for anything. There's no protection in place. And then they're selling it to make a profit, leaving behind for the next company the problems and concerns, hoping that they're naive enough to do it. And then most of these are under LLCs. So if the LLC goes under, what happens to the batteries? Because like the homeowner can boast about a contract says they're going to clean it up all day long. If an LLC is closed down, guess what? There's no contract anymore. Now you are solely responsible for that cleanup. And again, we don't have the infrastructure for that.
Right. That's right. And cleanup is very expensive. And I don't know if things have changed, but I remember a few years ago seeing a video from Europe, and it was basically a junkyard of electric vehicles. These vehicles, I guess the batteries that broke down, they were so expensive to fix that people just more or less sent them to, you know, the wrecking yard, the junkyard. When they get to the junkyard, they are figuring out now that these things are so expensive to recycle that it's cheaper to just stack them up and leave them. And I remember seeing video of these cars just stacked up and they're just left out in the middle of the pasture because the cost is just so much just to recycle these things. So, you know, a lot of this technology is just so new. It hasn't been around that long that we haven't quite figured out a good way to recycle or use it. And, you know, that's kind of what we have with it.
You know, my understanding is most of these batteries actually come from previously recycled or repurposed batteries, like the EVs and other.
The ones in the BESS systems?
Really? Yeah. So they're boasting. So like one of the things I've noticed is there is no end of life for these batteries for any lithium. So what they're doing is they're taking the EV and the other lithium and they're recycling it and repurposing it into these systems. Meanwhile, now you have larger scale versions of them that need to be recycled or repurposed because they again have no end of life.
Right. So, yeah, who's responsible for that?
Exactly.
And how much does that cost? Right.
So here's another thing as a fire captain that I would love to get your perspective on. Sorry, it just popped in my head. So I was referring to California. So go to the Palisades. So right now it's listed as a toxic area. People are not allowed to return at least minimum end of March. They're talking about beginning that process. So I'm looking at California, and this is what I'm seeing. You have lithium-based meters on all the houses. They forced everyone to go EV, so it's in all the cars. In the Palisades, especially, they had the power stations that were lithium-based in their garages with solar on top of their house mining lithium. And you have the BESS facilities all across the state. Not to mention the multiple EV manufacturers because they are EV states. And then you look at the fires and you see these trees standing, and people are like, oh, it's an attack. It can be an attack, but could it simply just also be that you have thousands of degrees of lithium from every capacity of your home that completely destroyed it, whereas the tree doesn't have lithium on it?
Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to speak exactly on the damage. I haven't firsthand seen it, but no, yes, that's correct. When you start again, these lithium batteries, they burn, and when most people think of when something catches on fire, the fire department shows up, you squirt water on it, it goes out. Well, the chain reaction in a lithium battery, it has to burn itself out. When you put water on this stuff, all it does is get agitated and just burns hotter, faster. It doesn't help. So, when you start talking about a lot of lithium, whether it be an EV car in a garage or a power plant, that is a lot of energy that's meant to be released slowly. Well, when you have all of that energy and you release it all at one time, it is going to be pretty violent, and there's not going to be much that a fire engine and a water hose is going to do with it. It's got to burn itself out. So, yeah. And, lithium batteries, lithium started, I'm wanting to say, around the 60s. It's been around since probably the 60s when they started really kind of getting into the lithium batteries. And they knew then it was kind of unstable. It's getting better over time. I mean, the battery in your cell phone is going to be a lithium battery. But what they figured out they have to do is put fail safes on these batteries. So a fail safe is a good example. Let's say summer day, you have your cell phone and you set it on the dash of your car. What happens when it gets hot? Your phone turns off, right? That's a fail safe that's built into it to prevent the battery from overheating. All the numbers that I have seen is about 176 degrees. Once you hit 176 degrees on a lithium battery, that's when you start getting what they call thermal runaway. That's when these things will ignite and start catching fire. So if you don't have the fail safes in, they will catch, they will overheat. Now, what happens when the fail safes don't work, right? That's when you get into trouble. What was it, 10 years ago? What was the little scooters that everybody was buying that they were charging in their house that started catching fire?
Is it like a moped or something?
They weren't the razors. They were like the little skateboards.
Oh, yeah. I know what
the little hundreds. Well, a lot of those were coming from China or whatever. They were kind of cheap. Well, people were plugging them in, and it did not have the fail safe to prevent the overheating. So these things were lighting off in their house, catching their houses on fire because the fail safes were not there. Because these lithium batteries are inherently, like I said, unstable. They get hot, and once they hit about 176, they start to burn.
I find that interesting. Because if you don't know, the control systems, the fail-safes, and these battery storage systems come from China. And actually, even when they do work, they emit an aerosol as the suppression system. And in 2021, I believe it was Elkhorn near Moss Landing. It's right there by it. They, because of the fire, actually ended up being the fire suppression system. So the fail-safe caused the runaway. It was a system failure that it ignited or released the aerosol at the wrong time that then led into the runaway and the off-gassing. And in turn, the fail-safe system ended up being the cause for the runaway, which most people think cybersecurity falls specifically under malicious intent. What they don't understand is cybersecurity also falls under unintentional situations such as malfunctioning software or microprocessing, such as a fail-safe fire suppression system for lithium. It doesn't have to be intentional.
Right.
It can be unintentional, but still is a cyber concern.
Right. Right. Well, I believe a lot of these systems, the fire protection system, and like say a BESS unit, the ones that I have seen, they put things in, you know, that way they can say that they have it in place. But the reality of it is if you have one of these things catch, it will not extinguish it. It will not put it out. It's proven time and time over they don't work for these lithium batteries. Now, if, you know, maybe if it catches at the right time of a spark, you know, it might be able to kind of drown out a spark to keep something else from catching. But these lithium batteries, once you hit 176 degrees, there's not going to be an extinguishing system that will prevent thermal runaway from taking place. Once it starts rolling, it goes.
I would love to talk to a scientist or someone that does pharmacology or something to explain to me the actual impacts of those, the repercussions of those fires, what that looks like not only for health, but for the agricultural land, for the farmers, for food, like such as the salad bowl and capital in California by Monterey, such as the effects to our cattle and beef that we use for our industries, such as our water. What does that look long-term effect? Because Monterey Bay goes into obviously the ocean. So what does that look like for our oceanic view? So there's a lot of unknowns, not only for the mitigation of the fires, but the effects after that and how to clean it up. There's so many unknowns that the capacity of 922 of those in Texas at that scale into our infrastructure, when we don't have infrastructure for it on top of that, it's just completely mind-boggling on how we could get to this point.
Right. And I don't know that there's a lot of answers to a lot of that right now because a lot of this stuff is so new. So I really don't think a lot of them know yet. You know, it's kind of like we go back in the early 1900s, 1920s, everybody smoked cigarettes. Well, it didn't come out till the 60s and 70s. Oh, hey, that causes cancer, right? So I think a lot of this is so new. I don't think you will know, you know, maybe our kids or our grandkids might find that answer. I don't know that we will. It's going to take time.
And that's the thing is that instead of creating problems that our kids and grandkids have to find the solutions for, let's wait until we have it. Let's wait until we have the solutions before we start this large scale problem that's going to need solutions. My argument is we learned through oil and coal. We learned multiple errors that way. We learned the hard way through those productions of energy. Even with nuclear, it's a learned process.
Absolutely.
But we already learned it with those. Let's not learn it the hard way with this one too.
Right. And you know, and that's the benefits of oil and coal is oil and coal has been around for over 100 years. So we know, you know, how to handle it, what to do, what not to do. And we're just not there with this, you know, we're not anywhere close, I believe, to, you know, what's going to be seen in the future as far as the side effects of things like this, right?
Kind of like in Van, Texas, here in our county, where they still have such contaminated water, they can't even use their own water source from whenever oil was fracked over there. So there's still ongoing cleanup from those lessons learned. I cannot wrap my head around this being the right course of action. If you don't have, like, at best, you can build it and then you can have it running, but the slight incident of concern, you have no way of mitigating the problem once the fires and runaways begin. And then you have no
Right.
known outcome from the aftermath of that and what that looks like for us. To me, that seems very impractical for the route to go at this time.
Right. You're looking at it from a risk versus rewards. There's a lot of risk for not a lot of rewards, right?
Exactly.
So, these battery systems, when they do put them in place, so basically, think of a Connex box loaded up full of lithium batteries with a computer in the front. Now you take about 50 of these things and you put them side by side, you daisy chain them together, you plug them into our grid. So how they're supposed to work is wind and solar. Wind only produces energy when the wind's blowing. Solar only produces energy when the sun's out. So what do we do on those cloudy, non-windy days when we're not producing energy? Well, this is their solution is, hey, let's get a bunch of batteries, and that way when it is windy or sunny, we can store some energy, put it back into the grid. And that's the mindset. What they don't tell a lot of people is the cost of these systems is astronomical, but when they do put that energy back into the system, if these things work the way they want them to work, you're only looking at 2 to 3 hours worth of power at best. So you go back to that risk versus reward, where your reward is 3 hours of power. But when these things go bad, you're looking at just a environmental nightmare that's tagged as green.
Yeah, I've noticed the government really likes to play with words. Green energy isn't so green. Inflation reduction isn't really all that reducing. They have a very interesting play on words that they choose. That it just because you package it nicely doesn't mean it's a good thing. You got to go into the
No, and there's going to be there's dangers to all of it. I would be unfair if I say there's coal doesn't pollute or whatever. There's dangers to all of it, but at the end of all is the more people you have move in, the more energy that you have to produce. So we kind of have to figure out what's the best risk versus reward. What's the best way that we can produce energy that's the safest? And history kind of shows it's nuclear, really. I mean, that's the most consistent, safe power that we've produced for many years is really nuclear.
It's clean. It has a shutoff. It doesn't have the pollutants in the way that they think that it does. It really, truly is. Honestly, this is my opinion. Call it what it is. It's a failed experiment. You had an idea for solar, wind, and battery storage. It has failed in every capacity. It's not sustainable unless we as taxpayers pay for it. I feel like we've been very clear in our progression of government in the last couple of months that we do not want to keep paying for things that we don't agree with. And so on top of that, it's not sustainable in subsidies without us paying for it. They're not mitigating. They're not producing in the way that they expected. If you go through and look at the charts and the graphs, they have expectation of production and then they have actual production, and they are consistently underproducing. And on top of that, you're putting these weak points in our infrastructure and grid. If you really start to look back when solar and wind started to be integrated into our infrastructure and connected to our grid, we start seeing the fail points when we start seeing Uri and things like that shutting us down. The storms, those were after these points started getting integrated into our grid. We didn't have any of those instances prior to that I can remember. I'm 36 years old. I'm not super advanced in age, but in my time frame, I don't remember the grid failing in the capacity that it does until the last not even 5 years.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of it too is kind of common sense. Like I said, solar only produces energy when the sun's out. Wind only produces energy when it's windy. if the vast majority of your budget is spent to make power this way, there is a large void there, whether it be nighttime or cloudy, non-windy days, to where you're not going to have power. So, it's not the solution for everything. There probably is a place for it somewhere, but making the majority of consistent power for the population that we have, it's just not going to be feasible, I don't believe.
I can't help but agree with you based off what I'm seeing. So instead of continuing down this path, they should pull their funds from these, deconstruct them, clean them up, and move into nuclear at that point. Invest in something that we, A, know the full process of, and B, know that it's clean and sustainable. Because really and truthfully, what they're looking at is solar, wind, and BESS are cheaper than nuclear. But is it really cheaper if it's not sustainable out of their own pocket? We're paying for it.
Right. Well, I've read an article, and I'm really trying not to get into politics on it, but I did read an article on the windmills that you see popping up everywhere, especially in West Texas. I thought it was a really interesting article. It broke down, and it's been a couple of years, so I'm not going to quote numbers, but basically the cost of one windmill and its lifespan does not equal the amount of energy that it will produce. And it basically said that each windmill will cost about -$7 million of what it was worth versus what its lifespan is. And they say those blades, you can't do anything with those blades. They just dig a hole and stick them in a hole. They don't break down. They're there for life. And they're everywhere. So,
yeah. Well, I'm thinking over our conversation. So we have here in Van County, we have the lack of infrastructure and resources for such a capacity. You have it next to not just like in the distance livestock. Literally, they share a fence line with over 300 head of cattle. There's a ranch of 600 acres right there. So you have them. It's not even that far separated. We have no evacuation plan for our livestock. On top of that, you have a volunteer fire department that, on a good day, you get 2 to 3 people that cannot sustain the duration of the actual fire, so you're going to have to outsource help regardless. And on top of that, they don't have the PPE necessary for such a type of fire, and you're going to need a hazmat, an evacuation zone, and so much further depending on the air that day, the wind, so on and so forth. And on top of that, there's no known actual information as to the aftermath impact. And even something as small as an electric vehicle can be substantial, let alone thousands of pounds of capacity. Is that what I'm understanding to be correct?
Yes. Electric vehicles by their own right is, like I said, as the fire service, an EV vehicle fire in the middle of I-20 in Dallas would be fairly taxing. You're probably talking 2 to 3 fire engines and maybe a ladder truck in Dallas just to be able to shut the traffic down. And you're looking at a 4-hour disruption. And that's with, I believe we're the 8th largest fire department in the United States. So you put one of those electric vehicles out here on the back county road on fire, it's going to be a very, very large scale problem for, the folks out here, the volunteers out here. And when you start multiplying that into a BESS unit out here, it's just, it's going to be a nightmare. It will be a nightmare. And that's why, like I said, my professional opinion, if they're going to use this stuff, it needs to be in like an industrial setting. And when I say industrial setting, think of things like the outskirts of the Houston area where they have all the oil refineries. That's an industrial setting to where you don't have people that live. You don't have livestock. It's set up with an infrastructure in place that has a water supply. They have hazardous material teams nearby that can monitor the wind. You have, a paid fire service that has the personnel that you can throw at it for a 2-day, a 3-day, a 4-day event that one of this would be. And like I said, none of that exists out there. There's just no infrastructure for it.
So you mentioned you need multiple fire trucks. I'm curious if you have the numbers. How much does it cost the department when a truck shows up and does that amount of labor and work? Do you know how much that 4 hours would cost the fire department on average?
Mm. Off the top of my head, I don't have those numbers. I don't know. It would be quite a bit.
Because it's pretty costly just for one fire truck to show up anyway, correct?
Oh, yes. I mean, when as far as showing, I mean, the fire engine alone. So a fire engine is what carries water. A fire truck is those real long trucks with the ladder hanging off of them. So there is a difference between a fire engine and a fire truck. But a fire engine, you're looking at about $1 million nowadays just for one fire engine, and a ladder truck, you're looking at about 1.4, 1.5 million. And now that's buying the truck, right? So to actually go out to an event, diesel, I'm sure those things get a whopping 4 miles a gallon in diesel and then run time. Paying the salaries of, those first responders that are there. Yeah, it's money. It is money. And that's what I said at the beginning. The fire service, we don't make money, we cost money. So that's why we're always at the back burner. Since we don't make money, a lot of this stuff coming in, through loopholes or whatever gets built, put in place. And then when it goes bad, we get to try to figure out how to handle it.
And just for those that may not know, where it costs money, it costs taxpayers money.
Oh,
we
100%.
do it. We do that because it's a safety mechanism to protect our home and our assets. So we pay for that. And then when we're paying for these types of incidences that are ongoing and have to be mitigated long term that have no actual process, we're paying for that as well. And we're expected to put our first responders in harm's way, essentially, for things that we don't know what we're doing at that point.
Right.
And honestly, I mean, so my frustration comes in regards to your position is because the lack of protection you have. There's a known issue with fire personnel getting cancer from the types of environments they're in consistently. It's very common. I've had two individuals that I've known that have considered family, one of which was family, that have passed from cancer from a lifetime career in fire. And then you go and you add these toxic chemicals that are known to cause cancer on top of that anyways. Like, that's frustrating for me. I can only imagine being in the field what that must be like to know to have to send your men out there to have to fight this and not know what the repercussions may be for them.
Right. Well, I'm a cancer survivor myself. At the age of 32, I was diagnosed with cancer that was job related. So, we're talking about, things that have been around for a while and knowing the cause and effect of things versus things that are new in the fire service. This is some of the stuff that we're just now really trying to figure out. So if you think of a house fire in 1950, what was a house built like in 1950? Everything was wood and cotton, right? Natural materials. So a lot of that stuff doesn't produce nasty smoke and the gases. Whereas today, if you look at a house, you have a lot of plastics, a lot of chemical, whether that be TV. The carpet in your house is a plastic material. We kind of laughingly call it solid gasoline. The couch that you sit on is not cotton anymore, right? They're all synthetic. Therefore, all of these things produce a lot of off-gassing in the burning process. So starting about 60s and 70s when a lot of this stuff really started burning, well, now we are finally kind of catching up and going, oh, hey, there's a reason why cancer is higher in the fire service now than it was 40 or 50 years ago, because we're no longer dealing with just basic wood and cotton. If you look around your house and look what everything's made out of, just think about it burning and what it's producing. It causes fires to be hotter nowadays, so we're seeing houses, what we call a flashover, meaning fully the smoke catches on fire itself. That about 4.5 minutes versus back in the 50s, it might take 8 to 10 minutes for that to happen. So everything is just burning hotter now because of this. And, we kind of call it solid gasoline under the table. That's not the correct term for it, but that's what we call it.
I could see that, honestly. You're putting gasoline on a fire at that point.
Right. Right.
You already have one stimulant that caused the fire, but then you have multiple reactors next to it on top of that.
Right. And, a lot of the gases that this stuff produces, even is flammable, they'll have a different ignition temperature. So when something in the house catches fire and the room fills up with smoke, you might have a certain gas that would light off at 500 degrees, and you might have other gases that might light off at 900 degrees. But when that portion of the gas lights off at 500, it automatically hits the 900, and it creates more or less what we call, referring to fire service, as a flashover, meaning everything in the room is on fire, and it's pretty instantaneous.
It makes me think of that movie Flashback. Would that be an accurate representation?
Yeah, that's kind of a little different phenomenon, but similar. Right.
So, for those that haven't seen Flashback, it's a very interesting movie for sure. It definitely has a plot twist for those that like a good suspense.
It's Hollywood, anyways.
It is definitely Hollywood for sure. So a lot of what I'm hearing is basic fire training and fire gear and fire equipment is not up to par with these types of equipment and these types of fires. So really and truthfully, these businesses should even be providing their own fire department that has the training in these. And not only the training, but the gear and the equipment that's hazmat and sufficient. So their water, their PPE, their own trucks even. Right?
Well, so we're going back to what I'm saying about the industrial setting. When you start getting into these industrial settings around Houston, a lot of them are private fire service. These, whether it be Exxon, Mobil, they provide their own fire service, their own equipment, and they pay their own fire personnel. So yes, that's a lot of what I was saying.
Okay.
When they belong in an industrial setting, right?
It's not just the location; it's the preparedness for an event. Okay, I see what you're saying.
That's right. They're trained. They're trained specifically for.
Oh, then I absolutely have to agree with you. If you're going to do it somewhere that they have the training, away from agriculture, away from livestock, away from civilians, away from anything that could harm what makes us America. And right now, that's not the case.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Right.
Well, Greg, was there anything that you might want to add or put out there?
I think we pretty much covered it. Anybody that is watching that kind of wants a little history of, kind of what we're talking about. If you look up May 2024, San Diego, California, lithium-ion battery storage facility fire. That one lasted 5 days, took over 40 firefighters just to contain it. I'm not saying extinguish. I'm talking contain it, confine it, to keep it from getting bigger. It took 40 firefighters in 5 days to do. So, you can Google it, look it up. There's several more of them. Put in BESS fire, BESS, battery energy storage systems fires, and you can read a lot about this stuff and see kind of the history that we're going on. At the end of the day, these companies will come in and they'll talk about the safety mechanisms, the safety factors that they have in place. They may say things like, "Oh, we don't use those type of batteries with the heavy metals in them. We're now using this new version." Well, a used car salesman's going to sell you a used car. You just kind of have to take that at face value and do the homework yourself and look. And you can kind of see.
It's funny because I did have that conversation recently with Larry about that. I asked the owner of Relay, I said, well, how is this different from Moss Landing? And he told me that, because the requirements have changed. And I said, okay, and what year did that change between 2022 to February of 25? He didn't have that answer because that was one of the questions. Because they do try to sell you that way. Oh, it's changed. We don't use the same things. Okay, what did that change exactly?
Right.
Okay, when did that change exactly?
Right, right. And at the end of the day, look, these are lithium batteries. Whatever they change inside of them is going to be. So anything new is an unknown. We just don't know. And, that's what we're dealing with is a lot of unknown.
Here on Overlooked Critical Matters, I like to say people do not know what they do not know. So you can speculate and give your input, but if you do not know what you do not know, how are you so certain of what you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
thank you, Greg, for coming on today and discussing this with us. I really enjoyed your perspective.
Sure. Thanks for
Sure.
having
And
me.
guys, we'll tune in next time on Overlooked Critical Matters, and we'll be discussing with more individuals their perspective and their input, and going down the rabbit hole of what do you not know that you do not know.